I've asked to introduce Allison Bailey, which, Allison Bailey needs no introduction, really. She is, she has sort of ticks all the intersectional boxes of being a child of immigrants, a black lesbian who's campaigned against Section 28 and for gay and lesbian rights and for racial equality. And she was still cancelled and set upon by Stonewall, the organisation that is supposed to protect gay and lesbian people. I can only imagine the betrayal that feels. And turned upon by her chambers, whose motto is do right and fear no one. I can only imagine. But Allison is one of those rocks, and it's such a privilege to know her. She's brilliant and brave and beautiful, and come out, Allison.
This is a day that our detractors never wanted us to see. Here we are in the Queen Elizabeth II Centre, celebrating our 2-year anniversary with flags flying high. I want to thank you for supporting LGB Alliance and me personally. Your support, your love have been truly amazing. Thank you. I want to say at the outset that this is not a speech about trans rights, but for what it's worth, LGB Alliance supports the protections from discrimination that people with a protected characteristic of gender reassignment enjoy. Incidentally, those protections, combined with the protections in the criminal law, hate crime, means that we have some of the most robust protections anywhere in the world. But this is a speech about lesbian, gay, and bisexual rights. And what happens when a movement emerges that tries to do something truly audacious, to replace sex with notions of gender identity, and to demand that no one objects. And if they do, to call them a bigot, a fascist, a transphobe. And what's more remarkable than that is that they get every political party to go along with them. I want to tell you about my journey to the Conway Hall on the 22nd of October 2019, because that wasn't the first time that I had met Kate Harris. Kate Harris and I met earlier on that year in a meeting at Covent Garden in a flat. And I was called to discuss what we were going to do about Stonewall and its decision to lobby for gender identity, specifically gender self-ID, that people can change their sex by declaring it so. We could see that there were obvious conflicts with lesbian rights, with women's rights, and we met to discuss what we could do. And do you know what stands out about that meeting? No one at that stage was talking about leaving Stonewall. It was our organisation It came out of the dark days of Section 28. We didn't want to have to leave. And so we met there. Simon Fanshawe was there, Professor Kathleen Stock, Johnny Best, Kate Harris, and me. I left that meeting early. Some might say I walked out, and they'd be right. I was incredibly anxious about what the future would be like if we could not stop this movement. A future where society was ordered not by sex, but by what people felt themselves to be, where people would be effectively diagnosing themselves with gender dysphoria. I've practiced at the criminal bar for over 20 years. I know what male violence looks like. I know that 98% of sex offences are perpetrated by men, by males, however they identify. And I was horrified that under proposals that were underway, these men would be able to identify into the category of woman, have their crimes recategorized as being committed by women, go to women's prisons. I was appalled. Women would lose all safeguarding, we would lose our identities and our ability to talk about our lived reality. And I was right to be worried. The boundaries that lesbians have from all males are being swept away as heterosexual men with beards declare themselves to be lesbians and demand access to our bodies and our identities. So let me be very clear. Lesbian and woman are taken. I didn't have the answers that night, and to be honest, I don't think that anyone at that meeting did. But I knew it was an emergency. I just didn't know what to do. Winding forwards, I received somewhere about September, early October, an invite from Kate Harris to attend a meeting at Conway Hall. Now, I'd thought this woman was happy to see the back of me, having left and walked out of her flat earlier in the year. But there it was, an invite to attend Conway Hall on the 22nd of October 2019 at 7:30. There were only 70 people that were going to be invited. We had to keep it secret, and when we got there, there was security. No one leaked that meeting, but I marvel. Marvel isn't the right word. I reflect with horror that in 2019, as of now, we need to have security. We need to meet secretly, to meet as lesbian and gay and bisexual people. It is an outrage. It was at the Conway Hall meeting that something truly extraordinary happened. Kate and Bev said, I think we need to form an organisation just for lesbian and gay and bisexual people. Working title, the LGB Alliance. What do you think? Do you agree? And with a hand-waving, floor-stomping racket, we voted yes, and we voted LGB Alliance into existence. Those two women, stalwarts of the lesbian and gay rights movement, had the foresight and the courage to realize that our needs would not be met if we were coupled to Stonewall and its gender identity lobbying. They will go down in history. Also at that meeting was Malcolm Clark, who you've heard from this morning. He tweets us at Twister Films. And if you don't follow him, you should, because he has some of the most well-researched Twitter threads online and on gender-critical Twitter. Malcolm has a very clear recollection that I spoke at the Conway Hall meeting, and apparently I was brilliant. I don't remember speaking. In fact, I didn't speak. Except for asking one question. Can I tweet about the meeting? And the answer came back yes. And so I left Conway Hall, I think it was about 10 o'clock, and on the bus home, I started to compose that tweet. This is an historic moment for the lesbian and gay and bisexual movement. LGB Alliance launched in London tonight, and we mean business. Spread the word. Gender extremism is about to meet its match. And I meant it as a come on, let's have this debate. We will win it. And the tweet went viral and we were launched. But do you know what? Initially, I got into trouble for sending that tweet, a mild trouble. We haven't launched, Allison. The launch isn't until January. Janice Turner has said it's the LGB Alliance, and you've just said it's LGB Alliance. But as the evening progressed, and we saw we were trending around the world, and there was hate coming in, no doubt about it. And I'll come to that in a moment. But there was so much love and so much relief from around the world. LGB people sighed a collective sign of relief that there was going to be someone challenging this gender identity theory that was apparently running unchecked throughout the world. We launched properly some days later with our goals to advance the interests of lesbians, gay, men, and bisexuals, and to stand up for our right to live as same-sex attracted people without discrimination or disadvantage. That shouldn't be controversial, but it is, and we all know why it's controversial. Stonewall made the decision in 2015 to lobby for what was known as gender identity. And listen to language, it's very important. The protected characteristic is gender reassignment. They were lobbying for something called gender identity. People who I know and trust have told me that Ruth Hunt, the then chief executive of Stonewall, gave them firm assurances that she would not lobby for gender identity. She wouldn't make Stonewall an organization that was lobbying for gender identity. The risks and the conflicts were obvious to her, but she did it anyway. And having set fire to our movement, to lesbian and gay and bisexual rights, she walked away. I haven't heard her speak on this issue. I don't know whether you have. But the position that Stonewall took was that it was going to lobby on behalf of two distinct characteristics: sexual orientation and gender identity. There was no conflict because Stonewall couldn't afford for there to be a conflict. And so one of those two, had to be sacrificed. And we all know which one it was. We became not same-sex attracted people, but same-gender attracted people. And that is why, when people ask online, if you're LGB Alliance, why are you focusing so much on gender identity? Well, it's because it's an existential threat to us. I can't put it better than J.K. Rowling. If sex isn't real, there's no same-sex attraction. If sex isn't real, the lived reality of women globally is erased. I know and love trans people, but erasing the concept of sex removes the ability of many to meaningfully talk and discuss their lives. It isn't hate to speak the truth. True words spoken by one of the bravest women that I know. When you consider, or when we consider, how the hate group label attached to LGB Alliance, it's useful to think about how much of a considered opinion this was. I mean, it's quite serious calling people a hate group. When did it start? Did it start a few months after they had a chance to consider our literature, our aims? A week even? It started the very minute I sent that tweet on the 22nd of October. I was saying, come on, let's have a debate. And they were saying, no debate. There's no LGB without the T. We had all of our fundraising efforts taken down. People sent postal orders. Thank you for those. Petitions were launched. I think there's one being hawked around at the moment. Everyone and their dog can sign a Change.org petition, by the way. They're meaningless. It was open season on the country's only lesbian, gay, and bisexual organisation. Can you imagine that? Yeah. Open season on the country's only lesbian and gay and bisexual organisation. Our rights are not conditional on us supporting gender identity theory. I want to read you Section 7 of the Equality Act 2010. Section 7 of the Equality Act 2010 states, a person has the protected characteristic of gender reassignment if they are proposing to undergo, are undergoing, or have undergone a process or part of a process for the purpose of reassigning the person's sex by changing the physiological attributes of sex. It provides protection from discrimination in employment, housing, education, and so on. What it does not do, unless you have a gender recognition certificate for which a medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria is required, is grant you the protections of the opposite sex. The trans umbrella has broadened to include just about anyone who imagines that they deviate from the binary, including cross-dressers. Where have all the transvestites gone? Where have they gone? Assuming, for the sake of argument, that all of these people with these various gender identities fall under the Section 7 protection, unless they have a GRC, and only 5,000 of the 500,000 plus people who are identifying as trans do, the protections they enjoy under the Equality Act are based on their natal sex. But you wouldn't appreciate any of this if you listen to Stonewall and the trans lobby, and government departments up and down the country, employers, the NHS. Stonewall simultaneously argued for the removal of the single-sex provision whilst also broadening the people that could come underneath the trans umbrella. I think that is wicked. It is wicked because it shows a complete disregard for lesbian, gays, and bisexuals. It is wicked because it shows a complete disregard for women's safety. It is wicked because it shows a complete disregard for people's mental well-being and their mental health. And all of this conference happened outside of any legal framework. All of it, all of it. And the government let it happen. Hate group. We are called a hate group routinely, even to their shame, by some parliamentarians. Now, a hate group is a very specific term. They advocate for unlawful discrimination against groups of people, usually minorities. They often advocate for violence, targeted harassment. Does that sound familiar? The TERF slurs, the death threats, the rape threats, the trying to get people sacked from their employment. The great irony is that the people who are calling us a hate group are describing themselves. And anyway, anyone who has met the mild-mannered Bev Jackson and the not-so-mild-mannered, but equally lovely Kate Harris, or any of the people that help run LGB Alliance, know that it is demonstrably ludicrous to refer to LGB Alliance as a hate group. The Equality Act 2010 was Labour legislation, and it was good legislation. It had far-reaching consequences, and it provided much-needed protection for 9 protected characteristics. So what happened? 2015, we know that Stonewall added on gender identity. No one noticed, or if they did notice, they didn't care, or if they did notice, they agreed with it. It was a Conservative government under Theresa May, and I don't doubt that she meant well. She didn't do her research, or those advising her didn't do their research, allowed in, effectively, de facto self-ID. They allowed Stonewall and the other LGBT organizations, there may be many of them, but they all have the same ideological perspective, to say, right, we are going to lobby exclusively for sexual orientation and gender reassignment. We're going to call it something called gender identity, which we're going to play around with and expand and build upon, but that's what we're going to do. And no one said to them, well, you can't do that. There's an obvious conflict. No, they did the exact opposite. They allowed Stonewall, who had become embedded in government departments, in employment workspaces, because of its work on lesbian and gay rights, to just turn that, and suddenly, in adding gender reassignment, they were embedded and free to lobby at will. To policymakers and parliamentarians, if you're listening, the message I want you to hear is that LGB Alliance are being unlawfully discriminated against. To the Conservative Party, I want to say, this is your Section 28 moment. Do not make the same mistake again. Yes. I was a teenager during Section 28. Section 28 of the Local Government Act 1988, everyone knows it. It was on the statute books and it prohibited the promotion of homosexuality. It left a generation of lesbian, gay and bisexual youth entirely without support. It was a disgrace. The Conservative Party rightly should feel forever ashamed of it. But I'm in my early 50s now, and I can honestly say that I have never, ever known such homophobia, such misogyny as I do now. And it's coming from the LGBT organisations that are supposed to represent my interests. Incidentally, and in passing, I've never known such racism. And again, it's coming from the LGBT+ movement. Because they routinely, it's not an isolated theme, they routinely say to black women, if you're considered to be a woman, why can't I? You look masculine, why can't I be a woman? They do that at the same time as invoking the murder of trans women in North America. And I know that the trans lobby will say, this is Section 28 in their favour. And what I say to them and I say to government is, Section 28 should not be used as a shield to avoid scrutiny. Anyone that does try to use it as a shield to avoid scrutiny should be looked at and scrutinised very hard indeed. My harshest criticism of the gender identity movement is what they are doing to lesbian and gay and bisexual children, to children generally. They're sterilising gay kids. The gender identity movement is a movement where you cannot rely on words having their ordinary meaning. Sometimes they mean the exact opposite. Arguably, the most pernicious example of this misuse of language is to be found in the debate about conversion therapy. People forced to pray away the gay, corrective rape. Those abhorrent practices are thankfully very rare in this country. But questioning and providing talking therapy to a 4-year-old that tells you they are the opposite sex is not conversion therapy. Under the affirmation model of the trans lobby, talk therapy, the treatment of gender dysphoria, would be outlawed. It would be outlawed. It's truly despicable. Puberty blockers. There have been a 4,000% rise in the number of girls and boys approaching GIDS. That's 70% to 30% boys. It's a complete reversal. The service used to be overwhelmingly boys and a minority of girls. I wonder sometimes if I was a child now, I'm sure that many of you have had these feelings, you've wondered yourself. If I was a child now, I'm pretty certain that I would have been put on puberty blockers. Doctors, when my mum would take me to the doctors, they would say the cut of her jib is like that of a boy. My parents did the best they could, and I love them dearly. But my childhood wasn't easy. There was trauma. I could have been persuaded that that trauma was an ease with my sex. There should be no first dibs on childhood. We have to let children grow up. Gender nonconformity should be celebrated. Now, there are undoubtedly those children who are gender nonconforming, who in adulthood look back on their childhood and say that they would have benefited from having their puberty stopped and having changed their sex in childhood. And there will also be those, I think the majority of gender nonconforming adults, who look back and think, there but for the grace of God go I. Only one of those groups are being listened to. And on the basis of the experience and the imaginings of one group, we're sterilizing children. Kiera Bell, who I want you to give applause to. Kiera Bell may not have won the battle that she fought in the Court of Appeal, but she may yet win the war. Because we are hearing, much to the frustration of Mermaids et al., that clinicians are being very slow to prescribe puberty blockers in light of the first instant decision. And well, they should be. Our work also includes detransitioned people, mostly women at this stage, but we will offer guidance and support to detransitioned women and men. Women who regret having taken hormones and having had their breasts amputated. Sinead Watson and Kiera Bell are ambassadors for detrans women. I'm not going to attempt to speak on the subject as articulately as they do. But I want to draw your attention to a piece of research that I came across shortly before preparing for this speech. It's been published in September 2021's Archives of Sexual Behaviour. Because you know how the saying goes, detransition is very, very rare, the trans lobby says, and if it happens, it's all down to transphobia. Everything is transphobic. But that's an aside. 60% of the detransition people they spoke to now felt comfortable in their own sex. That's 60%. 55% said they didn't feel that they were properly assessed. And 3/4 did not inform their clinicians that they had detransitioned. The transgender lobby has no interest in providing follow-up to these women and these men because they know what it will reveal. Sweden is an example in point and should give us all hope that change, when it comes, it can happen dramatically and quickly. Many of you may have seen the Trans Train, a groundbreaking drama following detrans women. Last year, they reversed the practice of prescribing puberty blockers to anyone under the age of 18. And they did so in defiance of the World professional association for transgender health, a transgender lobbying group, in my view. People asked on stage, what's the best way to peak trans someone? I think telling them about detransitioners is one way, but what I have done is I send people Laura Dobbsworth's photographic storytelling. Do you remember that? I think it was in the Times. She took pictures of detransitioned women, showing the breast amputations, showing the facial stubble, showing the male patel baldness, alongside a narrative of what brought them to that point. And almost invariably, there was trauma. There was same-sex attraction. And one of the saddest things that I read, and I hope Sinead doesn't mind me saying this, was Sinead's contribution. Sinead has had, as she's told you, her breasts amputated, and she has taken male hormones that have given her secondary male characteristics, voice, and she has hair loss. And she said that all of this had happened before she had had a partner, an intimate partner. Can you imagine that? And up and down the country and around the world, girls are removing breasts that have never known a lover's caress. I just want to say very quickly, just moving back to one piece of recent work. We recently submitted evidence to the Health and Social Inquiry into NHS litigation. It's an NHS initiative to reduce the amount of litigation they suffer. They can start with reversing some of the homophobic practices that we've heard about, for one, but also we said to them that there is a scandal coming. There is a coming medical scandal when it comes to puberty blockers. There is hope, and we are making progress. In a long and reasoned decision that was not made quickly, the Charity Commission decided that LGB Alliance should have charitable status. We attended the Conservative Party conference, and you know, I wasn't there, but people tell me that people walked across the aisle and they spoke to the LGBT conservatives and they got along. They didn't perhaps agree with each other, but they realized that we were not monsters, they were not monsters, and that we had a shared interest so far as LGBT rights are concerned. That's progress. But there have also been setbacks and bad behaviour. It's a source of deep regret that Labour refused our application to exhibit at their conference. And frankly, the Labour leadership seems utterly lost. Utterly, utterly lost. Variously saying that women shouldn't talk about their anatomy in plain, clear terms. So let me do that in plain, clear terms. Only females have a cervix. And we are neither hoarding rights or dinosaurs. Although I have enjoyed some of the inflatable dinosaur outfits that have been making appearances at various events. But seriously, it was a particularly ill-judged series of comments when violence against women and girls is at epidemic levels. Let me be clear, trans men, females, must be reminded to get smear tests. But to require all women to be reduced to body parts in order so as not to offend trans men is unreasonable. It was a source of regret that the recently appointed Equalities Minister, Mike Freer, refused to meet with LGB Alliance at the recent Conservative Party conference. And all I can say to him is, we pay your wages. How dare you, the Equalities Minister, refuse to meet with the country's only lesbian, gay and bisexual organisation? How can you possibly justify such a move as a lawmaker? Despite all of this, our door remains open. We are not in the business of holding grudges. The stakes are too high. Many people believed that they were standing up for lesbian, gay and bisexual rights by agreeing to the worst excesses of the gender identity movement. They believed it was the next civil rights challenge. It's not. It's really not. To my mind, it is one of the most dangerous political movements to sweep the globe. Let's face it, no political party has covered itself in glory. But every political party has pockets of resistance. There's Lesbian Labour, you're here today. Conservative Women. Labour Women's Declaration. And we are especially thankful to MPs who, at great personal and professional cost, have stood up for women's sex-based rights. And I'm thinking of Rosie Duffield and Joanna Cherry. Conference, the tide is turning. People are wondering why women are being called cis women or cisgendered. People with vaginas, chest feeders, cervix havers, pregnant people. All the while, men are being called men. Women and men are putting their careers, their reputations, their mental well-being on the line in this fight. Sonia Appleby won her whistleblowing employment tribunal. For raising concerns about GIDS, that they were sterilising young gay and lesbian children. Professor Kathleen Stock has been treated despicably, but her treatment has galvanized public opinion. And Selina Todd, where are you? I think you were here earlier on. Has written about and has suffered the abuse that is running rampant on university campuses. It's a crisis. Something has to be done to protect these women. Professor Joe Phoenix, Raquel Rosario Sanchez, and James SS, I hope I've pronounced that properly, are all crowdfunding to take legal action for having been discriminated against. And we support them, and we keep supporting them, with average donations of £20 to £25. There is no billions coming from the religious right. There are billions going into the gender identity movement. Billions of pounds spent building gender clinics around the US. Billions of pounds being earned by surgeons amputating perfectly healthy body parts. I thought that it was a joke when I saw a 2-for-1 double mastectomy during Pride Month. It wasn't a joke. And there are signs, conference, that the EHRC is coming to its senses under the leadership of Kishwar Faulkner, Baroness Faulkner. And we look forward to new guidance on the operation of the single-sex provision for all males, to exclude them from women's spaces where it is proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim. We have made real progress in re-energizing the lesbian and gay movement. We have lesbian and gay news. David Bridle's paper. We have the stellar contributions from journalists such as Josephine Bartosz. Dennis Noel Kavanagh. Gary Powell and others. Our allies in the transsexual and transgender community continue to write and speak in support. Debbie Hayton has been particularly articulate. And in Canada, trans men, females, are speaking out about what is going on. They are catching hell because the first rule of remembering sex is that men will always, always put themselves first, and there's no difference whether you're a trans man or a woman in that regard. But they're speaking out. We now have enshrined in law gender-critical belief as a protected characteristic, thanks to Maya Forstater. And we have the truly heroic contribution of J.K. Rowling. In closing, because Rona has shown me the two fingers, which means that I've got 2 minutes. In closing, I want to send a message to Nick Herbert, Lord Nick Herbert, who isn't here today. He must have had something better on. Lord Nick Herbert, do not make participation in next year's global conference on LGBT rights conditional on LGB people supporting gender identity. That would be in defiance of the Equality Act. It would be undemocratic. Our legal protections are not conditional on any other characteristic. It would also be in violation of the Nolan Principles. So, conference, LGB Alliance is here to stay. Thank you.